Our gospel reading today comes to us from the Gospel of Matthew. It is a very familiar passage that you should know pretty well. It's in chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. Please listen for the word of God. Do not judge so that you may not be judged. For the judgment you give will be the judgment you get, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but did not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye, while the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. This is the gospel of the Lord. So as we are working our way in Bible study through the book, The Answer to Bad Religion is Not No Religion, one of the things that the book is teaching us this past week is that bad religion has a tendency to be hypocritically judgmental, to be judgmental in ways that are negative, right, that are hurtful. Judgment is an interesting topic for Christians. I classify it as one of those things that we all say we hate, but we all do. Right? It's sort of a thing, right? Judgment is a thing that people do. As we consider Jesus talking about specks and logs and all this hypocrisy in this passage, we have to begin by understanding what exactly is Jesus talking about. Like, what is judgment? What is not judgment? And what is the part of it that we need to cut out, right? Judgment is not inherently bad. We make useful judgments all the time. Jesus clearly wasn't condemning the entire concept of judgment, just certain ways in which we use it for harm specifically. This passage is not about the need to assess a person's character. That's a good form of judgment. That's a way we get to know each other, right? That's a way we learn to trust each other. Or measuring the morality of a person, which can get a little tricky, but in general, right? This is not about that kind of judgment, at least not when it's done honestly and fairly, and with a healthy dose of grace. This passage is not about discernment. This passage is not about analysis. This passage is not about observation, right? It's about the sort of work we do to have what we like to call good judgment. Often you've probably heard of somebody complimented by saying, boy, they have really good judgment. I'm not one of those people, by the way. Practical judgment, honest judgment, fair judgment, right? The problem begins, the sin begins, the harm begins when we begin to make hypocritical judgments, weaponizing morality to harm and demean other people. Once morality becomes a means to oppress, to harm, or to divide, well, it's no longer morality. It is now sin. It is no longer healing. It is now destructive. It's toxic. It's cruel. Good judgment still recognizes ideas like accountability, right? Jesus never said, don't hold people accountable. Jesus never said, don't hold people responsible. Jesus never said that people have to eventually sort of answer for their actions, right? This is not an absolution, right, of all accountability or responsibility. This is about the use of accountability and responsibility and judgment as a basis for separating other people from God, for suggesting that somebody no longer has value or worth because of their sinfulness, judging people in harsh ways, judging people in mean ways and bigoted ways. These are the things, right, that cause the kinds of hypocrisy that drive people out church doors faster than anything. When judgment becomes a servant of our vengeance or our grievance, it becomes unjust. It becomes violent. The danger of judgment is found in its intentions. Do we judge in order to hurt or to heal? Do we judge to diminish or to discern? Do we judge to condemn or to gain deeper understanding? Judgment, of course, becomes unjust when we begin to use it to demonize innocent people in service of our own power or our own hatred. Selective judgment, bigoted judgment, judgment that becomes fear-based, projections of our own brokenness onto people we personally dislike. I believe Oscar Wilde once said, morality is the attitude we adopt towards people we personally dislike. Judgment that becomes this kind of fear-based thing becomes bad judgment, right? It is rooted in the very hypocrisies that Jesus is warning us about, hypocrisies we face even today. When I was a kid, there was a silly saying that they used to say that when you point at somebody, there are 3 fingers pointing back at you. Did you ever see it? Do it. There's 3 fingers pointing back at you, right? So this idea that there's something about judgment that is almost self-condemning, right? This is, of course, a schoolyard version of the idea that we hear sometimes in our world that all accusation is confession. Logs and specks. The things we project are usually the things that we are doing. Jesus made it clear that our own sin is made more evident, not less evident, log-sized, when we begin to judge the sins and the specks of our neighbors. It seems that one of the keys to making good judgment, then, is a healthy dose of self-awareness. Also a skill that seems to be somewhat lacking in our current cultural construct. Self-awareness and the basic empathy to understand that no human being exists in some sinless state of perfection. You can judge until you're blue in the face. You are still a sinner. It is self-awareness that both sees our own sins first and sees other sin not for the purpose of condemnation, but for the purpose of healing and forgiveness, for the purpose of understanding and reaching some kind of peaceful place. Hypocrisy derails compassion. Our fear, our self-righteousness, they cloud our judgment, but bad judgment is self-righteous by nature. It is hypocritical by nature. It becomes its own sin. It becomes its own conviction. Most of what I've said is probably not news to you. We've heard warnings about judging others throughout our entire lives. It was one of my grandmother's favorite things to say. You do not have a right to judge other people. My mom used to say it all the time, right? You are no better than anybody else. Why do we keep doing it then? Mom said no, Grandma said no, Jesus said no. I guess we have to touch the stove, right? Did you know that the Greek word for hypocrisy has theatrical roots? Hypocrisy in its Greek form can mean actor or performance. It implies the idea of wearing disguises, of acting unnaturally, right? Acting as somebody else, right? So hypocrisy by its definition, even in the Greek that Jesus uses when he says words like hypocrisy, means fake. It means the understanding that the judgment you are hurling at the world is empty. It is performative. I was blown away by that, I'm not going to lie. But I'm always happy when there's a theater connection, right? But it makes sense, right? It makes sense that as we look around ourselves and we see all of this kind of performative morality in the world, right? We see all of this kind of performing religion, these people who like to publicly proclaim, right, their righteousness and their faithfulness. And it makes one wonder, right, does a hypocrite know they're a hypocrite? I mean, crazy people don't know they're crazy, right, Linda? Yeah. Or do some people just become so lost in the performance that they start to believe it? So caught up in their own self-righteousness that they truly cannot see the log in their own eye. So is bad judgment delusional? Self-deceptive, knowingly dishonest, all of that? Yes. Performative judgment, performative morality, performative religion doesn't hide the logs in our eyes. It makes them bigger. It makes them more obvious. It makes them almost satirical in the way that people run around saying one thing and doing the other, right? My favorite example, of course, is about ministers. Ministers who condemn people for who they love or who they are or what they look like or where they live or where they're from while leading lives of complete debauchery until they get caught. And every single time I see the story pop up on the news, every single time I see the post on social media about ministers being arrested for their crimes or for their abuse, my very first thought is, I bet they said some pretty nasty stuff about me. I bet they said some pretty nasty stuff about LGBTQ people. I bet they can't stand transgender people. I bet they railed publicly about the immorality of every other human being in the world who didn't vote the way they do, or look the way they do, or love the way they do. Not that we want to, because clearly it was debauched in the first place. Now, the first problem is, of course, there's a reality to this particular example that we have to accept, and I'm going to just say it clearly. Being LGBT or Q is not a sin. The second problem is the utter hypocrisy of an anti-gay or moralistic preacher who is a predator, who stands in the pulpit to condemn the personal lives of other people while committing the exact same sins in their private lives. Friends, that is why I will never tell you that I am perfect. I sin all the time. All ministers do. All people do. It is what we do. The idea that ministers are perfect in some way is ridiculous, hypocritical. That's my example. There are plenty of other examples. If I asked you to give me an example of a giant log-eyed hypocrite, I'm sure you could come up with 5 or 10 of them, right? Judgment, good judgment, requires an awareness of self that is founded in an empathy for others, and a whole bunch of patience and grace and truth, right? When Jesus spoke against judgment, he was asking all of us to take a very deep and long look to see what our own weakness is, to see that we share humanity with other people, to see that we are a collective group of people called to love and to welcome one another, to nurture each other through moments of sinfulness, through moments of failing. It has become far too easy to ignore hypocrisy. It's hard to notice anymore because it just seems to happen all the time. It gets dangerously easy to accept hypocrisy as some kind of natural human behavior, right? Or to see it as so pervasive that it cannot be stopped. The hypocrisy of going to church and claiming to love your neighbor while wearing masks and snatching them off the street. The hypocrisy of talking about the God of peace while making sacrifices to the gods of war. The hypocrisy of suggesting that God does not want certain people in God's church, while ignoring your own failings so publicly and so obviously. The very basic hypocrisy that somehow, somewhere in our religious tradition, somehow, somewhere in our faithful understanding, violence has become okay or necessary or a means to something good. It's ridiculous. It is hypocritical. It is nonsense. Here's the good news, because I'm supposed to leave people with hope, right? That's what I keep getting told. I'm too yelly, not enough hopey, so let's have some hope, right? The good news is we already know the answer to this problem. We already have the answer to this problem. In fact, it was embedded in your created DNA when God lifted you from the dirt the first time. It lives inside each of us, and it is our greatest Christian superpower of all the superpowers. It's love, holy love. Love that is built on forgiveness and grace, given to us so freely by God that we have no choice but to give it to others. Love that is not ours to weigh or withhold or to place conditions on, but love that comes so freely from us it must flow through us into the rest of the world. Love that creates empathy, love that creates compassion, that leads us to forgive. Love that reminds us of our connection to one another, that my weakness is not an isolation, that your weakness does not isolate you. We share these things. Love that reminds us of our connection to one another as imperfect children of the God who forgives us anyway. Jesus presents us with the choice, the great choice that Jesus presents over and over again. What will you do with your faith? Now that I have told you these things, I have taught you these things, now that I have died for your salvation, what will you do with it? You can use your faith as a tool to silence, to judge, to be unjust. You can use faith to do terrible, horrible things. You can use faith as a basis for bigoted brokenness, for division, for violence, and all that stuff. You can do that if you kick Jesus out of the church. But if you believe that Jesus meant what Jesus said, if you believe that we are called by Jesus to very particular things, then we are called to live out a faith that heals the wounds of hypocrisy's violence, that heals the wounds of hypocrisy's cruelty, that heals the wounds of judgment. We can choose to hear the Creator's call to love and accept and give life to our communities, or we can choose to further separate, condemn, and judge. Be aware, though. Jesus makes another thing very clear in this passage. This is the part of the passage that should be humbling to all of us. Jesus didn't note that anybody's eye was clean. Specks and logs. Jesus was suggesting that your logs are more important than the other specks. That you should pay more attention to the thing that is right in front of you, the thing that is yours. And then engage in healthier conversations with other people, where maybe you're a little less judgmental because you realize you're doing it too. He did say, however, that when you use the speck in someone else's eye to harm them, or to condemn them, or to isolate them, or to separate them from the love of God, when you do those things, Jesus says very clearly, be aware that for all of your self-righteous deflection, for all of your holier-than-thou proclamation, you've still got something in your eye. Amen.